I woke up to the sound of crackling flames. At first, I thought I was dreaming, maybe a campfire, maybe a summer barbecue. But the thick, acrid smoke pouring through my bedroom window told me otherwise. My chest tightened as I threw the sheets off and ran to the window. What I saw made my blood run cold. My motorcycle, my police-issued, stay-toned motorcycle, was engulfed in flames in my own driveway. Fire danced across its frame, licking at the pavement like some hellish bonfire. My first instinct was to grab the fire extinguisher, but even as I stumbled toward the door, I knew it was too late. The flames were too high, the damage already done. The heat hit my face the second I stepped outside, my bare feet smacking against the cool concrete. My heart pounded in my ears as I stared at the smoldering wreck, but beneath the shock, a slow-burning rage started to rise. That was when I heard it, laughter. I turned my head toward the house across the street, where a small group of people stood in the shadows of a perfectly trimmed lawn, wine glasses in hand. They clinked them together as if celebrating. My jaw clenched as recognition set in. It was the HOA board. Diana Harrington, their ever-so-smug president, stood front and center, whispering something to the others before flashing a self-satisfied grin in my direction. "Next time follow the rules, Mr. Reynolds," she called out, her voice dripping with condescension. For a moment I was frozen in place, not out of fear, not out of shock, but because I was trying to comprehend just how far these lunatics had gone. I had dealt with criminals, reckless drivers, and the occasional back-alley lunatic, but never had I seen suburban homeowners commit an outright felony over something this stupid. "Alex, are you all right?" a voice called from behind me. I turned to see Alina Morales, my 72-year-old neighbor, hurrying across her yard in a floral bathrobe, her silver hair wild around her face. Unlike most in this pristine neighborhood, Alina's house stood out with its vibrant garden and colorful decorations, a constant source of HOA citations. "Stay back, Alina," I warned, gesturing at the intense heat. "It's not safe." She ignored me, coming to stand beside me as we both stared at the burning motorcycle. "Those bastards," she muttered, her Spanish accent thickening with anger. "I saw them creeping around earlier. I should have called you." 2 days ago, these same people had knocked on my door with a welcome letter, a piece of paper wrapped in a veiled threat. The Homeowners Association, or as I had come to think of them, the neighborhood mafia, had made it clear that joining was highly encouraged. They spoke in that rehearsed, fake-friendly tone that made my skin crawl. They wanted control over my property, over my house, over where I parked my own damn vehicle. I had politely declined, not thinking much of it. And the fines started rolling in. First, a notice for my grass being a half-inch too long. Then another one claiming my police motorcycle was a non-compliant vehicle and needed to be stored out of sight. A $500 fine. I had laughed at that one, laughed and tossed it in the trash where it belonged. I wasn't part of their ridiculous little club and they had no authority over me. Apparently they hadn't taken that well. "They did this to my Carlos too," Alina said quietly, pulling her robe tighter around her small frame. "Not a fire, but they slashed his tires the week after he refused to tear down the memorial garden he built for our son. Carlos died fighting them, heart attack, right in the middle of an HOA meeting." I looked at her, startled by this revelation. "Alina, why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes, sharp despite her age, flicked toward Diana's retreating group. "Because I've been waiting for someone who could actually do something about it." The fire department arrived within minutes, and soon my driveway was a chaotic mess of flashing lights and firefighters battling the flames. The smell of burnt rubber and scorched metal filled the air. I stood there, arms crossed, watching in silence as my bike, the very machine I had used to chase down criminals, respond to emergencies, and serve my community, was reduced to twisted, blackened scrap. One of the firefighters, a guy I knew from town, walked over and let out a low whistle. "Damn, Alex, what the hell happened?" I exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of my neck. "HOA happened." His brow shot up. "You serious?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. My jaw was clenched so tight my teeth hurt. "You know," the firefighter said, lowering his voice, "this isn't the first vehicle fire we've responded to in this neighborhood. 3 in the past year, all homeowners who butted heads with Diana and her crew." Alina nodded grimly. "Last month it was the Patel's car, their crime, installing solar panels without permission." I knew exactly who had done this. The security cameras on my property, cameras Diana didn't know about because they were disguised as ordinary outdoor fixtures, had captured every damn second. Hours later, when the fire was out and the wreckage was all that remained, I sat in my living room reviewing the footage. My fingers tapped against the table as I watched the grainy black and white video play out. The HOA board, yes, the entire damn board, had crept onto my property in the dead of night. I watched as one of them, some balding guy in a sweater vest, poured gasoline over my bike like a psychopath. Another, a woman I recognized as Diana Harrington's right hand, lit the match. My eye twitched. There it was, video evidence. They had set fire to a police vehicle. Not just any vehicle, but a state-owned law enforcement motorcycle. A felony, a massive felony. And here's the best part, they had no idea who I really was. Sure, they knew I was a cop. They might have assumed I was just some low-level officer with a beat patrol and a bad attitude. But they didn't know I was a state trooper specializing in organized crime. They didn't know I had jurisdiction beyond their little suburban fiefdom. They had no clue they had just committed a federal-level crime right under the nose of someone who could bring their entire world crashing down. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile creeping onto my face. Oh, they had really screwed up this time. A soft knock at my back door interrupted my thoughts. Elena stood there, holding a manila envelope. "You've got cameras," she said, not a question but a statement. "I've got 3 years of documentation, bank statements, meeting minutes, photographs." She placed the envelope on my table. "Diana's not just running an HOA, she's running a racketeering operation." I opened the envelope and spread out its contents. What I saw made my blood boil even hotter. Records of selective enforcement, financial discrepancies, evidence of kickbacks from preferred contractors, and most disturbing, proof that the HOA had been forcing elderly residents to sell their homes below market value through systematic harassment. "Why didn't you take this to the police?" I asked. Elena's laugh was bitter. "I tried. Diana's brother-in-law is a county commissioner. Her son-in-law is a judge. The local police chief plays golf with her husband every Sunday." She tapped the papers. "But you're not local police, are you?" The next morning, as the sun painted the sky in soft hues of orange and blue, I stood outside with my arms crossed, watching as the HOA board gathered for their usual morning gossip session near the community garden. Diana, still dressed in her pearl necklace and power suit like she was running for office, shot me a triumphant look. "Such a shame about your motorcycle," she called out, fake sympathy oozing from every syllable. "Perhaps next time you'll reconsider our community guidelines." I smiled, a slow, deliberate, wolfish grin. "Oh, I definitely will," I replied, my tone light, almost playful. "In fact, I'd love to discuss it with all of you, maybe even over at the station." "You blinked the station." I pulled out my badge, flipping it open just enough for the sunlight to glint off it. Her expression changed instantly. Her smile faltered. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint right there on the sidewalk. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence evaporating like mist in the sun. "Yeah," I continued, enjoying the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "You know, seeing as how you and your little gang committed arson against state property, I figure we should have a proper chat about it. Maybe with a few of my colleagues, you know, the ones who arrest people for felonies." Diana took a step back, then another. The other HOA members looked like deer caught in headlights. I let out a slow chuckle. "See you soon, folks." And with that, I turned and walked back into my house, leaving them to wallow in their incoming doom. Oh, this was going to be fun. "They're not going to go down easy," Elena warned, joining me on my porch, a pair of binoculars in her hand. She'd been monitoring the HOA's panicked gathering from her upstairs window. "Diana's already on the phone with someone, probably her legal team or her political connections." I nodded. "Let her call whoever she wants. This goes beyond local politics now." Elena hesitated, worry creasing her face. "You don't understand. Her husband, Richard Harrington, he's not just some rich retiree. He was a federal prosecutor before he moved into private practice. He's got friends in the Justice Department." That gave me pause. Powerful connections could complicate things, potentially interfere with the investigation or pressure my superiors. But Elena's next words changed everything. "That's why I've been collecting evidence for so long. I needed something even Richard couldn't bury." She adjusted her glasses. "Did you notice the pattern in those financial records I showed you?" I hadn't had time to analyze them fully yet. "What pattern?" "Every time a property was harassed into selling, it was bought by the same shell company. And guess who owns that company?" Her eyes gleamed with vindication. "Richard Harrington, through 3 layers of corporate entities." Now the picture was becoming clearer. This wasn't just petty HOA tyranny, it was a sophisticated real estate scheme. They were systematically driving down property values or forcing sales, then buying the properties at reduced prices, likely to develop or flip them later. The HOA members were panicking. It was obvious from the way they huddled together outside Diana's house, whispering in frantic tones. Some of them kept glancing at my house, their faces a mix of dread and confusion. I watched from my porch, sipping my morning coffee, enjoying the sight of their entire world unraveling before them. The The same people who had smirked and laughed as they set my motorcycle on fire now looked like scared rats trapped in a sinking ship. And the best part, they still didn't know how deep in trouble they actually were. I had spent the entire night reviewing the security footage, making copies and preparing my next move. It wasn't just about revenge, though let's be honest, that part was pretty satisfying. This was about justice, about making sure these power-hungry, self-important busybodies learned that they weren't above the law. They had played their little suburban mafia game for too long, terrorizing homeowners with their ridiculous rules and outrageous fines, thinking no one would ever stand up to them. Well, they had finally messed with the wrong guy. By mid-morning, I got a call from the station. My buddy, Officer Ramirez, had already seen the footage. His reaction was priceless. He had laughed for a full minute before saying, "You mean to tell me a bunch of soccer moms and retirees committed first-degree arson on a state trooper's bike? Oh man, this is going to be fun." He promised to handle the paperwork while I prepared for the next step. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Captain Sullivan, my direct superior. "Reynolds," he barked without preamble, "I just got a call from Judge Harrington asking if one of my troopers is harassing his mother-in-law's homeowners association. Want to tell me what the hell is going on?" I explained the situation, the arson, the evidence, Alina's documents showing a pattern of criminal activity. There was a long pause, then, "Jesus Christ, these people set fire to your service vehicle because of where you parked it." "Yes, sir." Another pause, "And you have it all on video?" "Crystal clear, sir." He exhaled heavily. "Reynolds, I need to be straight with you. The Harringtons have considerable influence. This could get politically complicated." My heart sank. "Are you telling me to back off, sir?" "Hell no," Sullivan growled. "I'm telling you to do this by the book. Every I dotted, every T crossed. Give them absolutely no procedural grounds to wiggle out of this. And Reynolds, bring in the FBI on the racketeering angle. This is bigger than a torched motorcycle." My spirits lifted. "Yes, sir." "And Reynolds, try not to look like you're enjoying this too much." I couldn't make any promises on that one. The HOA meeting was scheduled for noon. I didn't want to miss it, so after a quick breakfast, I got dressed in my casual off-duty clothes, grabbed my badge, and headed down the street. Alina insisted on coming with me, clutching a folder of her own documents. "You need a witness who isn't a cop," she said firmly. "Someone these people have been victimizing for years." The meeting was being held at the community clubhouse, the same place where they had probably toasted to my misfortune the night before. When I walked through the doors, the room fell silent. Every single HOA board member was there, sitting at their long, polished table, looking at me like a ghost had just walked in. Diana was seated at the center, her expression carefully neutral, but the tight grip she had on her pen gave away her nerves. The other members shifted in their seats, avoiding my gaze, suddenly much less confident than they had been when they were setting my property on fire. What I hadn't expected was the crowd of other homeowners who'd shown up. Word had apparently spread that something big was happening. The tension in the room was palpable. "Mr. Reynolds," Diana said finally, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "to what do we owe the pleasure?" I took my time walking up to the table, letting the silence stretch between us. Then I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and turned it around for them to see. The footage played in full clarity, the gasoline, the match, the laughter, the flames. The color drained from Diana's face. Someone in the back let out a small, strangled gasp. "I think we need to have a little chat," I said, my voice calm, almost amused. The reaction was instant. The man in the sweater vest, the same one who had been a little too eager with the gasoline, shot to his feet. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "Sit down," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a tone I usually reserved for criminals. He sat. Diana took a shaky breath. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for this." "Oh, I'm sure there is," I said, crossing my arms. "I'd love to hear it. Maybe you can explain why a group of homeowners decided to commit felony arson over a parking dispute." No one said a word. I let the silence drag on before continuing. "Here's what's going to happen. In about an hour, officers will be arriving at your homes with arrest warrants. You see, unlike you, I don't just make up rules and fine people for existing. I actually enforce real laws. And setting fire to a police vehicle, that's a serious crime. So congratulations, you all just turned your little HOA into a criminal organization." The panic in the room was palpable. One woman clutched her pearls like she was about to faint. Another man was sweating so hard it looked like he had run a marathon. But Diana, she was still trying to keep control. This is ridiculous," she said, though her voice lacked the usual confidence. "This is all a misunderstanding." I smirked. "Right, a misunderstanding. You accidentally poured gasoline on my bike. You accidentally lit the match." She licked her lips, searching for an argument. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make the hair on her neck stand up. "Tell you what, why don't you call my captain and explain to him why you thought it was a good idea to burn a stay-toned motorcycle? Maybe he'll see your side of things. Maybe he won't press for the maximum sentence." Her composure cracked. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for support, but there was none. The other HOA members were shifting uncomfortably, clearly realizing that she had led them straight into disaster. Then the doors opened and in walked two uniformed officers. Ramirez was in the lead, looking entirely too amused at the whole situation. "Good afternoon, folks," he said cheerfully. "I've got some paperwork here with your names on it." But before he could continue, the clubhouse doors burst open again. A tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit strode in, flanked by another man carrying a leather briefcase. "Nobody is being arrested today," the suited man announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm Richard Harrington, and this entire proceeding is a farce." Diana's relief was visible, her composure returning instantly. "Richard, thank God." Richard Harrington surveyed the room with the cold confidence of someone used to commanding authority. "My wife and her colleagues are upstanding members of this community. Officer Reynolds here is clearly pursuing a personal vendetta because he refuses to comply with neighborhood standards." The crowd of homeowners murmured, some nodding in agreement. I realized with surprise that despite everything, the Harringtons still had supporters, people so invested in property values and neighborhood standards that they were willing to overlook criminal behavior. "That's Officer Reynolds of the State Police," I corrected calmly, "and we have video evidence of your wife committing arson against state property." Richard waved this away dismissively. "A misunderstanding that's being blown wildly out of proportion. Any charges will be dropped once the proper authorities review the circumstances." Elena, who had been quietly watching from the side, stepped forward now. "Like you dropped the charges against the Patels and the Joneses and my Carlos," her voice quivered with barely contained rage. 3 years, Richard, 3 years I've been documenting your wife's reign of terror." Richard's eyes narrowed as he took in Elena. "Mrs. Morales, with all due respect, your vendetta against this HOA is well known and thoroughly discredited." "Is money laundering discredited too?" Elena shot back, pulling papers from her folder. "Or your shell company buying properties after the HOA forces people out? How about the kickbacks from contractors?" The room erupted. Some homeowners gasped in shock, others shouted questions. A few of the HOA board members looked genuinely confused. Apparently not everyone had been in on the full scheme. Richard's face hardened. "These are slanderous accusations with no basis in fact. My wife and I—" "Save it for court," I interrupted, "because this isn't just about a motorcycle anymore." As if on cue, the doors opened once more. This time, 2 people in dark suits entered, flashing badges. "FBI," announced the woman in front. "I'm Special Agent Carter and this is Special Agent Patel. We have warrants to seize all HOA records and financial documents." Richard's cool facade cracked ever so slightly. "This is outrageous. On what grounds?" "Wire fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit interstate real estate fraud," Agent Carter replied crisply. "Plus, we're particularly interested in your connections to Judge Harrington, given the pattern of dismissed cases against your HOA." Absolute chaos erupted. Some members tried to protest, but they were quickly silenced by the sight of handcuffs being pulled from belts. The woman who had clutched her pearls actually did faint this time, slumping dramatically against her chair. One man tried to run, only to be intercepted by another officer at the door. It was a full-blown meltdown. Diana stood up, her face red with fury. "This is harassment," she shrieked. "We are upstanding members of this community. You can't do this." Ramirez just grinned. "Ma'am, you burned a cop's bike and we can absolutely do this." Richard attempted to intervene, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the Attorney General right now." "Please do," Agent Patel replied. "I'm sure he'd be very interested to hear about your offshore accounts and how they connect to recently rezoned properties purchased by your shell companies." Richard froze, his confident expression faltering for the first time. One by one, the HOA members were handcuffed and escorted out. Some cried, some screamed, some begged for leniency. None was given. But the scene wasn't as uniformly satisfying as I'd expected. The crowd of homeowners had split into factions. While many cheered as Diana and the board were led away, others were openly hostile, shouting at the officers and at me. "You're destroying our property values," one man yelled. "The HOA protects our investments," shouted another. "They're just doing their jobs," a woman insisted, as if their jobs included setting motorcycles on fire. I hadn't anticipated this, that some neighbors would be so invested in the system that they'd defend criminals rather than admit the HOA was corrupt. It was a sobering reminder that justice isn't always universally celebrated. As I watched them being led to the squad cars, I couldn't help but shake my head. These people had spent years lording over others, thinking they were untouchable. They had bullied homeowners, fined them for absurd reasons, and acted as if they were above the law. But now they were just criminals. Ramirez clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You know," he said, chuckling, "I've seen a lot of stupid criminals in my time, but this takes the cake." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in days. "Yeah," I said, watching as Diana was shoved into the back of a squad car, still screaming about how this was unfair. "It really does." Elena watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. "Carlos would have loved to see this," she murmured. As the last of the HOA members were driven away, I took a deep breath, inhaling the sweet, sweet scent of justice. The neighborhood was finally free, and damn, did it feel good. Or so I thought. What I didn't expect was the backlash. While many residents celebrated the HOA's downfall, others, particularly those with expensive properties and investments in the neighborhood's exclusive image, were outraged. Signs appeared on lawns, "Bring back the HOA" and "SDA and DARDS matter." An emergency community meeting was called by concerned homeowners, many fearing that without the HOA's rigid enforcement, the neighborhood would decline. The implication was clear: without Diana and her crew policing every blade of grass, undesirable elements might move in. "This is exactly what Richard and Diana want," Elena explained as we watched neighbors argue in the street. "Division. If the community fractures, they'll have supporters when they go to trial." She was right. Within days, I noticed I was being followed, subtle surveillance by men in unmarked cars. My police colleagues warned me that the Harringtons were pulling every string they could reach, trying to paint me as a rogue officer with a grudge. The court case that followed was nothing short of a spectacle. The entire town had heard about the incident, and everyone wanted to see how it would play out. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing, and I had to fight the urge to laugh as I watched Diana march in, dressed in her finest clothes, acting as if she was walking into a gala instead of a criminal trial. She carried herself with the same smug attitude she always had, as if she truly believed that she was above the law. The other HOA members, however, were a different story. They looked like they had aged a decade overnight, their faces pale and filled with regret. What I hadn't anticipated was the coordinated defense strategy. Richard had assembled a high-powered legal team that argued the HOA members were victims of an overzealous state trooper with a personal vendetta. They painted me as someone abusing my authority, Diana as a dedicated community leader, and Elena as a bitter widow nursing old grudges. Worse, someone had leaked selective portions of my personnel file to the press, highlighting past complaints, mostly from wealthy individuals upset about receiving tickets. The narrative was building that I had targeted the HOA because I had an anti-authority complex. The prosecution didn't hold back. The security footage was played in full view of the entire courtroom. Every moment was crystal clear: the gasoline being poured, the match being lit, the triumphant little celebration they had afterward. The gasps from the audience were audible. Even the judge had to pause for a moment before shaking his head in disbelief. Diana tried to argue that it was all just a misunderstanding. She claimed that they were simply trying to enforce community standards and that my refusal to comply had left them with no other choice. When that didn't work, she shifted tactics and tried to play the victim, claiming that they had been intimidated by me and that the fire was an accident. The judge was having none of it. "You expect me to believe," he said, rubbing his temples, "that 6 grown adults accidentally poured gasoline onto a police motorcycle, accidentally lit a match, and then accidentally stood around laughing while it burned?" Diana stammered, her carefully rehearsed words failing her. The judge didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the jury, who didn't even need to deliberate for long. The verdict came swiftly: guilty, every single one of them. But the larger case, the FBI investigation into the real estate fraud and racketeering, was moving more slowly. Richard Harrington had connections, and the case was complex, involving multiple jurisdictions and sophisticated financial maneuvers. Sentencing day for the arson charges was even better. Some of them got probation, hefty fines, and community service. A few, including Diana and her closest lackeys, got actual jail time. She had been so certain she could talk her way out of it, but the moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, reality hit her hard. The woman who had ruled over this neighborhood with an iron fist was now just another criminal being escorted out of the courtroom. The fallout from the case was massive. The HOA was effectively dissolved overnight, with most of its board members behind bars or too ashamed to show their faces in public. There was no one left to keep it running. The community held a vote, and in record time, the HOA was officially disbanded. People celebrated like it was a national holiday. Someone even set off fireworks in their backyard, something that would have earned them a fine just a week earlier. But not everyone was celebrating. A vocal minority of homeowners concerned about property values and neighborhood standards began organizing to form a new HOA, one that would, they insisted, be more reasonable while still maintaining the character of the community. I received anonymous threats in my mailbox. Alina's garden was vandalized one night. The neighborhood was at war with itself, divided between those who wanted freedom from petty tyranny and those who feared change. The best part, the funds that had once been used to pay for the HOA's ridiculous rules and enforcement were now being put to better use. After some discussion with the neighborhood, we decided to turn the old HOA office into something useful, a community park. But not just any park. It was going to be a barbecue and gathering spot, a place where people could enjoy their own property without fear of being harassed over fence heights or the color of their front doors. I made sure to personally oversee the demolition of the HOA office. Watching that building get torn down was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Gone were the endless stacks of fines, the patronizing newsletters, the ridiculous regulations about mailbox styles. In their place would be picnic tables, a grill station, and a giant sign that read HOA Free Zone. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same land that had once been used to control people was now being used to bring them together. The final twist came the day before the park's grand opening. A black SUV pulled up to my house. A man in a suit stepped out, not law enforcement, but clearly some kind of federal official. "Officer Reynolds," he said grimly, "I'm here on behalf of the U.S. Attorney's Office. We need to speak about Richard Harrington." My stomach tightened. Had Richard found a way to wriggle out of the investigation? "What about him?" The man glanced around. "He's agreed to cooperate, fully. He's turning state's evidence against a network of corrupt officials and developers operating across 3 states. I blinked in surprise. Why would he do that? "Because the alternative is spending the rest of his life in federal prison." The man handed me a folder. His testimony implicates judges, police officials, and 2 state senators in a massive corruption scheme. Your motorcycle fire was the thread that unraveled the whole sweater. I opened the folder to find copies of Richard's statements, hundreds of pages detailing years of bribes, kickbacks, and illegal real estate deals. My name appeared in several places, usually accompanied by phrases like unexpected complication and catastrophic miscalculation. "Deanna," I asked. "Not part of the deal?" Richard threw her under the bus completely. The man actually smirked. "Turns out she was the weak link all along. Richard claims the arson was her idea, executed without his knowledge or approval." The first community barbecue at the new park was a massive success. Families who had been at odds for years over petty HOA disputes sat together, laughing, eating, and enjoying the freedom they had fought for. Even some of the police officers who had helped with the arrests showed up, Ramirez included. He took one look at the banner I had hung over the grill station and burst out laughing. "You really named this the anti-HOA cookout," he said, shaking his head as he grabbed a plate of food. "Damn right I did," I replied, flipping a burger. "Got to make sure no one ever forgets what happened here." Alina, moving with more energy than I'd seen from her since I'd known her, was holding court at a picnic table, surrounded by neighbors eager to hear her stories. People started sharing their horror stories about the HOA, trading tales of absurd fines and power-hungry board members. One guy talked about how he had been fined for having an improperly shaped flower bed. Another told a story about getting a citation because his trash can was visible for exactly 3 minutes past the HOA's strict pickup window. The more stories I heard, the more I realized just how much people had suffered under their ridiculous rule. But now they were free. As the sun started to set, I sat back in my chair, watching the community come together in a way it never had before. Kids were playing, neighbors were talking, and for the first time since I moved here, I actually felt like I belonged. The pro-HOA faction had mostly stayed away, still nursing their resentment. A few had even put their houses up for sale, unable to accept a neighborhood without rigid enforcement. But they were the minority now, their power broken. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a new face, a guy, probably in his 40s, walking around the park looking at the setup with interest. He eventually made his way over to where I was sitting and extended a hand. "Nice place you got here," he said. "I just moved into the neighborhood. Name's Greg." "Alex," I said, shaking his hand. He gestured toward the banner. "So what happened to the old HOA?" I chuckled, glancing around at the happy, relaxed crowd. They had a little accident with fire. Greg laughed, clearly thinking I was joking. "Well, sounds like this place is better off without them. Hey, speaking of which, have you guys thought about starting a new HOA? You know, one that's a little more reasonable." I set my drink down, turned to look him dead in the eye, and grinned. "Greg, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that." The look of panic on his face was priceless. He held up his hands, laughing nervously. "Kidding, totally kidding." I handed him a plate of barbecue. "Good, now eat before I start writing fines." Elena appeared at my side, linking her arm through mine. "Another convert," she said approvingly. "We'll make a believer out of everyone eventually." The night ended with fireworks, laughter, and a sense of peace that had been missing for far too long. I had moved into this neighborhood looking for quiet, but I had found something even better. I had found a community worth fighting for. And in the end, that was better than any fine-free lawn or perfectly measured flower bed. As I leaned back and took a deep breath, I realized one thing: I had won, and damn did victory taste good. But as I watched Elena dance with her grandchildren under the stars, I knew the real victory wasn't mine. It belonged to everyone who had suffered under the tyrants with clipboards, everyone who had paid ridiculous fines, everyone who had been bullied and harassed in the name of property values. This neighborhood wasn't just free from the HOA, it was free to become something better, a true community built on respect rather than fear, and that was worth far more than any motorcycle.